Welcome to the meeting of the Plymouth Charter Commission. This meeting is hybrid. It's being held here in person in the Great Hall as well as on the Zoom webinar. And it can be viewed live on the local PAC TV channel. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees may register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page of the town website. And Zoom attendees, if they want to make public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. And the in-person audience, anybody that wishes to speak tonight should just register at the podium and sign the sign-up sheet, which is on the podium. So we'll start tonight's meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Tonight we'll start off with a guest speaker. By invitation, it's the town moderator, Steve Trifletti. And anyone, the practice of this commission is that when we invite somebody in, they would speak for typically 20 minutes and answer questions. Others who are here just during public comment would be limited to 7 minutes each, which would not include the questions from commission members if we want to ask questions from what you say. We do have to limit speakers to those kind of time periods so that we get our work done, because this commission has an awful lot to do in a short period of time. We have to present a draft of the charter 1 year from this month, and we have to do a lot of drafting, and we're still gathering a lot of information. So we'll start tonight by welcoming our town moderator, Mr. Steve Trifletti. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Abbott, and also members of the Charter Review Commission, members of the public. I'm delighted to be here before you because I believe that it is always a good idea to be reviewing our town charter, our town bylaws, and any other rules and regulations that might be promulgated.
Need a little more volume from Zoom.
I don't know that I can give you more volume.
That's better. Yep.
Is that better?
Yes. That's better. Much better.
Better.
Okay. And in terms of the Charter Review Commission, as you know, in our current charter, there's a provision to review the charter at least once every 5 years. I think that's a good exercise. I'm glad that right now there's a commission rather than a review committee. Certainly makes my job a little bit easier in terms of making sure that we review the charter. And I also want to remind the commission that I think it's important to look at what changes should be made, whether it's a whole cloth change of government or just some tweaking on housekeeping, and whether or not changes that might come before you should be in the charter or whether they should be in bylaws or whether they should be in rules and regulations. I think we've got to be careful. If we think of the charter as a constitution, then often it may be appropriate when there are some changes to be made to put them in bylaws or to put them in some rules and regulations rather than in the charter. So I just ask that you keep that in mind when you do propose and make some changes. Now, in terms of things that relate to the moderator and the legislative form of government, we currently have a bicameral form of government. And one of the things that I have been concerned about during my 30-year tenure as town moderator is to preserve and protect and defend the legislature. And by that I mean that at times there may be members of another branch of government, such as the executive branch, even people serving on another board or committee that may want to, how shall I say it, take on some of the role of the legislature. And so I think it's important that the charter help us to clearly define and distinguish the different responsibilities of the branch of the government. And just as I have often ruled at times that the legislature cannot do certain things that are reserved for the executive branch and the select board, so too it's important that the select board and the executive branch not interfere with the responsibilities and roles of the legislature. And I think that makes us stronger as a town. In terms of where this commission may go in terms of a larger view of the structure of town government, we've seen a number of proposals. I recall back in around 1990, there was a proposal for a strong town manager, town council form of government. There have also been some proposals for a mayoral form of government. Sitting as moderator, I appreciate the fact that the issues facing the town can be very complex. They require lots of expertise. We're fortunate in that we currently have professional staff that give us advice, and they are well-educated, skilled, and trained. And we receive that through reports and presentations from our professionals, as well as hearings that come through the Advisory and Finance Committee and the various boards and committees. I would certainly hope that whatever changes, if any, that might be made, that we continue to value the role of our professional staff. And so one of the reasons why over the years I've not been a fan of a mayoral form of government is I'm concerned about who could be, who in this town is electable and also qualified to run the town. And looking at many people over the years who have run for townwide office and been elected, I'm not so sure that many of them, including, I would include myself in that group, are necessarily competent or capable or experienced to be running a town. And so when we have a town manager, an assistant town manager, and various other department heads who are educated and trained and experienced in some of the day-to-day running of the town, I would hope that that would be something that would be maintained. I personally supported the town council, strong town manager form of government, because I thought at the time, many years ago, that it might make sense to have a legislature, if you will, a town council that meets more often than town meeting and might be smaller in size. And I would just say to you at this time that as the town grows, as the number of precincts may increase, I would ask you once again to consider whether or not we need to have as many town meeting members as we have. Currently with 135 and with a possible another precinct or two, that's going to greatly expand already. It's difficult, certainly as moderator, to assure that everyone gets a chance to speak on all articles. And there are times when the question is called and debate closes before everyone gets a chance to speak. And so I would just be concerned about numbers. Another change that occurred during my tenure was the creation of the position of assistant moderator. And I'm very pleased at the manner in which that has evolved over the years. Certainly, I believe that every position should have backup, and we've seen that sometimes town meeting members resign and then we have people that can fill the position, or there have been caucuses. We've had quite a few since this past election where we've had to fill vacant seats for town meeting members. So too, we just had an election to fill a seat in the select board. I am concerned about the cost to the town for such an election. I don't know whether or not there could have been a mechanism in the charter that would have saved the town the cost of that election. But nevertheless, with respect to moderator, we have an assistant moderator. And I wanted to say that that role is taken on increased responsibility, certainly during COVID. And for the past 3 town meetings and for the one coming up, the assistant moderator's role is greatly expanded as she's been heading up the technology team, the training for town meeting members, and much of the oversight for the video conferencing platforms that we're using. So whether it's something for the Charter Commission to consider or recommend, we do have for each year in the budget the salaries or stipends for elected officials. And while the assistant moderator is not an elected official, I think that it would be helpful to the town to give some recognition to the work of the assistant moderator and to consider some type of mechanism where a stipend could be paid for the assistant moderator. Those are my general comments. I know I haven't taken up 20 minutes, but I would welcome the opportunity to engage in some discussion with members of the Charter Review Commission or anyone else in attendance who might have a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Questions and comments, Presley Brewster. But before we get to our comments, Presley, let me just say that there are 7 commissioners here tonight on the panel, and 1 present by Zoom, Frank Mann, as an 8th commissioner. So I think there's only 1 commissioner absent. Okay, go ahead, Presley.
Yeah. Hey, Stephen, how are you? Thank you for coming. What is your take on the precinct chairs, the COPC, and what their role is and how you see, could their role be better? Because I know that you have a lot of interaction with COPC. Could you just speak to, where you see that role and if you see, that role could be bettered or where it could go?
Thank you, Wrestling Brewster. That's a great question. Certainly, I think when a past charter commission or committee recommended it, I think it was certainly a positive improvement to the legislative process. And the reason is, I believe that anything that facilitates preparation, planning, and review prior to town meeting is good for the town. I can remember when I was a town meeting member that I would sit in the auditorium of Plymouth North High School and I could observe town meeting members who had their manila packets and they had not been opened until they showed up at a session of town meeting. I think now that is not the case because I think the structure of caucuses has forced town meeting members to do homework and preparation prior to town meeting. With respect to the committee of precinct chairs, it's very helpful to have an opportunity to be able to communicate throughout the year outside of the regularly scheduled town meetings. And as moderator, I serve throughout the year, and there's much to do in terms of planning and preparation for each town meeting. And in particular, during the pandemic, it's been particularly helpful to have the committee of precinct chairs participate in some way in the discussion and planning for town meeting. So I think that it's been good. I think we have to be careful to remember that each chair does not necessarily represent all the views of the precinct, and therefore the committee of precinct chairs do not necessarily represent even a majority of the views of town meeting members. So I think we have to be careful in terms of how we view the role, certainly as a liaison, as a way to communicate throughout the year, outside of town meeting, to be able to gather information, feedback, and present it so that we don't wait until town meeting floor if there's a pressing issue. I know I attended a committee of precinct chairs meeting recently, and there was an issue involving a road in, I think Brook Road in Manomet. And I thought that the discussion was very helpful, that the committee of precinct chairs listened to some butters and constituents. And I just thought that that was very helpful because there was some need for having JB listen to these people even before the October town meeting. But again, I think that in terms of how far we go in anointing the committee of precinct chairs with power through the charter, I think you've got to be careful because you have to think about how much, if anything, the 135 town meeting members want to give up in terms of their role and responsibility throughout the year. But I think in the balance, it's been an excellent addition to the charter because it really, in a structured way, helps town meeting members to focus on planning and preparing for town meeting in advance of the town meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Malaguti.
Good evening, Steve. Steve,
Good evening,
we
David.
have 15 precincts and, as you've said, 7 members per precinct, 135 town meeting members. I'm hearing rumblings that we might have 17 precincts. Now, in our review of the charters, there's one that sticks in my mind. I think there's 290 town meeting members. What would you say would be an optimum number? And also, if we lean towards town meeting, should we be considering an alternates position?
Certainly, I think alternates is a good idea because right now we've been working with the town clerk and she has been very busy trying to fill multiple vacancies. It might be something you might want to ask her, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were at least a dozen, at least maybe 10% of town meeting may have had vacancies that need to be filled. And that's a fairly large number. So, query whether or not it's advisable to just have the precincts caucus, or whether or not it should go to the next highest vote getter. I would certainly favor a next highest vote getter process, just because it seems to me there are people that are motivated to participate, take the time to get the signatures, and maybe tested through the election process. So I certainly think that that is a worthwhile thing to have in the charter. I believe we have 9 and not 7 town meeting members per precinct. And while I don't have an exact number, I think I'd have to extrapolate based on 17 precincts. But I will say this, I think right now 135 is a large number, and I would certainly support a reduction in any amount, even if it were just a smaller amount, because I think you're really, testing the limits when you think about how many town meeting members speak at town meeting and how many who don't speak, how many who recently resigned or did not run for re-election. We had a number retire in this past year. And, what were the reasons for that? Was it because of the fact that we're doing virtual and there are now some technology skills that are helpful to be a town meeting member? Or was it because of just the process? And many of these people who did not run again for town meeting are people who have been long-standing town meeting members, but have not necessarily spoken a lot at the debate level, but certainly have voted and may have been vocal in their precincts, but, you know, just not at town meeting itself. So I think the alternate idea is good, and I think in terms of a number, I would support a reduction.
Thank you for correcting my math.
I just want to make a comment on Mr. Trifletti's last comment. Steve, one of the things we've been doing, just so you know, what the commission is currently up to, we took all the towns in the state, we looked at all the towns with populations of at least 30,000, and actually some that were smaller, and we're now reviewing all those charters from all the towns that have at least 30,000 people, and a few selected smaller ones. The charters that we are reviewing are presented each night. I think we'll probably be doing it for another meeting or two. Then we will have gone through all of them. And we are highlighting some of the interesting points that would be helpful in Plymouth, that might improve our own form of government if we were to choose from it. And at some point, we will take all those comments and put them together and see what we have. But as far as the number of town meeting members go, and this, as you remember probably, this was an issue in a charter change a number of years ago, that Plymouth already, even now with 135, is one of the smallest town meetings of the large towns. The larger towns that are over anywhere from 30,000 to 60,000, many of those towns have town meetings in excess, well in excess of 200 town meeting members. And I was wondering, in your doings with the Moderator Association, you must be talking to moderators in some of those towns with those very large town meetings. And have you discussed the size of the town meeting and what's optimal? Because I remember when we did the discussion these years ago, when you looked at the chart of all the towns, I think Plymouth then was like the fourth smallest town meeting. The only one being, there was 2 or 3 that were smaller, most of the others were all larger. Of course, we've grown a bit since then. I was wondering, has that come up during your moderator meetings?
Bill, great question and observation. I'm wondering if you've been looking at my emails in the past 24 hours, because coincidentally, I received an email from a moderator who's a member of the Mass Moderator Association, and he asked that very question. He's doing a survey, wanted to know how many town meeting members we had, whether we had alternates. Also wanted to know when we first started with representative town meeting. So I can tell you that the association is conducting a survey right now. And during the pandemic, I spent a little more time with members of the Mass Moderator Association for the very reason that we've gone virtual. And so it's enabled all of us to participate more. If there's a Saturday morning meeting, more people attend, because it doesn't mean traveling out to Sturbridge or some other Western Mass community. And I can tell you that moderators certainly were challenged during the pandemic as to how to manage all the kinds of issues that we were faced with in terms of training and participation. And I believe that most moderators in towns would view Plymouth as a model for how to conduct a virtual town meeting. And in fact, moderators contacted me, and I would ask you to consider inviting a moderator. And I have in mind Mark Sylvia, former assistant town manager for the town of Plymouth, who is now a moderator. I believe it's in Freetown, it's somewhere down that area. And I believe he has over 400 town meeting members in a town smaller than ours. And I think that if you were to interview him, it would be helpful for a number of reasons. Number one, he is familiar with the town of Plymouth, having been the assistant town manager. Number two, he's from a smaller town with a larger representative town meeting. And I think you would then hear from him some of the challenges that he faces. And in some towns with larger numbers of town meeting members, they took advantage of the state statutory changes for remote participation wherein they reduced the quorum. I didn't ever ask the town to reduce the quorum because I didn't think it was necessary, and I didn't think it was necessarily a good idea. I wanted to see as much participation as possible, and we proved as a town that we could have a high level of participation even with remote virtual town meeting. However, other towns that may not have been successful in dealing with maybe an unwieldy number reduced the quorum and had many people not participate. I believe that for one of the virtual town meetings, Mark Sylvia told me perhaps as many as over 100 didn't participate. And I thought to myself, you know, that's unfortunate to have that large a percentage of town meeting members not participating at town meeting. So the fact that we are already one of the smaller town meetings is not necessarily a reason not to further reduce and maintain at least the number we have now or less as the number of precincts continue. And again, serving as the presiding officer of town meeting, I know the number of people that contact me outside of town meeting, and I listen to their concerns, and I just understand that there are some people that are discouraged from speaking if there are many other town meeting members who are more activist in terms of their interest in being added to a speakers list. So I'd like to do whatever we can to try to encourage a higher percentage of town meeting members to speak and debate. And I think one of the ways to do that might be to reduce the overall number of town meeting members.
Thank you. Mr. Pizer tells me that he thinks that town was Fairhaven.
Fairhaven, that's correct.
Right.
Fairhaven.
Other comments? David?
You mentioned that we've been talking about the number of town meeting members. How about the frequency of town meeting? In earlier comments, you said a council form of government meets frequently, monthly, sometimes twice a month. Our town meeting meets twice a year. What are your thoughts about frequency of town meeting and related, you know, the frequency of required decision-making for the complexity of the town?
David, that's an excellent question. And you may know that certainly when I served as a town meeting member and started as moderator, there was only one annual town meeting in the spring. And through a change, we put in the second fall town meeting, which I think is a good idea. There's a lot of planning involved in a town meeting, and certainly more of the planning at the staff level and with boards and committees, and there's costs associated with that. So while I wouldn't be opposed to putting in more scheduled town meetings, I think that we have the ability to do that anyway with calling a special town meeting, which we've done in years past. Not so much since we've introduced the second fall town meeting. It seems to me there are less specials, but you may recall most notably when we were looking at attracting a movie studio, there were plans for special town meetings. So we have that ability to do that already in place. On the other hand, I've often heard that we have a concern in this town about the legislature not meeting as often as a town council would meet. And I think there's, that's why I think the town council forum can have some appeal, but that would be different from a town meeting. So while, you know, a town council that might have a representative from each precinct and maybe some at large, and might be, you know, 17 or 20 members, you know, that might lend itself to meeting more often. I'm not so sure whether or not when you have 135 or when you get up to close to 150 with a couple more precincts, whether or not it makes sense to pull them all together in a structured, formal way more than twice a year, when we still have the ability to do it anyway if there's a need to call a special town meeting.
Mr. Cohan?
Steve, just on the same train of thought as David Peck has presented, this idea of multiple town meetings more often than just the spring and the fall, that there is this capability that the town can call a special. And my question is, you touched on a little bit of the organization that has to go on an article, meaning that there's the warrant opening and closing, and there's time allotted for material in meetings and FinCom and selectmen, and eventually going to caucus and town meeting. How do you see that logistically working out, having been at the epicenter of these activities for now over 30 years? How do you see that all coming together? How could you see more than 2 town meetings? What would make that work?
It would be a challenge. I mean, I think you'd have to maybe look at streamlining the process a little bit to the extent you're able, but you're absolutely right, Bill. I've been told from staff that after we complete one town meeting, they're busy already the following week starting to plan for the next town meeting. Because as you correctly observed, whether it's putting together budgets or, putting together articles and then making sure they go through all the various boards and committees, it takes a while to do all that. And so it would certainly be a challenge if you layered on top of that even 2 more town meetings that you had quarterly. It would be difficult to be ready given the current structure and process. Now, maybe there's a way to streamline it, but right now, they're all going to the select board, they're all the articles, they're all going advisory and finance, they're all going to the committee of precinct chairs. If it's school related, they weigh in. If it's planning, they weigh in. So there are a lot of groups to consider, not to mention all the staff time, and then putting together all the paperwork that you need for town meeting and getting it all out in time to everybody. It would be a bit of a task under our current form with the number of town meeting members that we have.
So just to continue on that train of thought, the number of town meeting members can be something that creates a level of planning that may make more than 2 difficult, where these articles might be going. But if, in the same train of thought, if you had more than 2 town meetings a year, and you were making decision what article would go to what town meeting, some articles wouldn't probably get piled in. Maybe these town meetings would become like micro town meetings, where rather than entertaining, we've seen articles in up into the 40s at times. But if you had more than 2, you could get into a situation where the sponsors of articles would realize they have more than 1 or 2 options to go to town meeting, and would start planning accordingly. And then you'd end up with probably a smaller number of articles, which would then give a greater level of debate on an article, because you couldn't bury something in the midst of a very busy town meeting.
One of the criticisms that I've heard over the years about our town meeting form of government is the fact that you usually only have 2, and that there's a feeling that we lose out on some economic development because of that, businesses don't necessarily operate at such a slow pace. And so if they have to wait such a long time for approval, they may just decide to go elsewhere where the process might be friendlier. So, but, query whether or not that concern is going to be satisfied by a few more town meetings, or whether or not it's really a different form of government. I have to confess, I have not personally experienced the town council form of government, where you have a smaller body meeting more often and having legislative powers. But it strikes me, having served a term on the school committee and having observed the select board and the planning board, that those types of elected official committees, multi-member committees, seem to be able to handle business throughout the year and respond more quickly. When I think of the pandemic and most recently the school committee needing to respond to issues such as the wearing of masks, I mean, they didn't have to wait for a quarterly or a semi-annual meeting in order to deal with it. They can meet as often as they wish. And so I think to really meet some of the concerns that I've heard about the business sector wanting us to be more efficient or quicker with processes, I'm not sure that another town meeting or so is going to necessarily satisfy that, but it might be an improvement to what we have. And you are correct, Bill. It's often the case that people pull articles just before town meeting. We had it at the last town meeting where I believe the Pine Hills had a couple of articles, and they decided just prior to town meeting to pull it and put in some more time before bringing it back. Now, had we had a quarterly meeting between April and October, would they have put it on? Possibly they would have. So it's certainly something to consider and ask developers such as the Green Company what their view might be on that type of thing. Because we have obviously many other people that look to locate. I remember once we were going to have a car dealership come to the town, and it was high-end vehicles, and it probably would have been a very good fit for the town of Plymouth in an appropriate place. And yet town meeting didn't approve because the staff person who could have answered questions about environmental impact had left after the lunch break and wasn't there to answer questions of town meeting members. And so town meeting members declined to move forward with that, and we didn't get that car dealership. You know, it strikes me that if we had another opportunity to hear that issue prior to 6 months later, maybe we wouldn't have lost that advantageous business partner who could have helped with our tax base.
Thank you. Larry?
Steve, one of the issues that came up with your appointed committee was, and there has been criticism about one person controlling the Advisory and Finance Committee. And I know your response at the time was it's necessary to be agile because when there is a person leaving the Advisory and Finance Committee, sometimes it's close to a town meeting and therefore there needs to be action. Can you imagine a situation, excuse me, in which you have appointing authority, but there is a later review by a different group of people?
I'm not quite sure as to whether there's a model similar to that at another level of government. It's not something that with which I'm familiar. I would say that certainly my appointments can be reviewed ultimately by the voters when I or the moderator stands for election. In terms of appointments, what you said was true in that it's often necessary to respond quickly And certainly, as the appointing authority, I'm able to do that. And usually, most people, except when you were clerk, you were aware of how many times there were vacancies throughout the year. Because the Advisory and Finance Committee has 15 members, and maybe there'll be 17 when we pick up 2 more precincts. It is a committee where, because of the heavy lifting, people sign up for an extra term, and then when they're into their 4th year, they resign. People move, people get elected, and most recently, I had multiple vacancies after the last election. Certainly, when Harry Helms was elected, his position had to be filled. There was another member who moved to Carver, and that had to be filled. And then there are people that don't want to be reappointed for another term. So in those cases, I have always felt that it was important to keep the Advisory and Finance Committee fully constituted as soon as possible. I've had resignations 2 in 1 day. And as you said, often the resignations occur at the start of the town meeting process. You know, in January, when Advisory and Finance Committee starts their meeting, their hearings. And we'd be concerned about a quorum if we didn't keep the committee fully constituted. So I felt that in the balance, it has been helpful and desirable to have the moderator as the presiding officer for the legislature to be able to appoint members of the Advisory and Finance Committee. I have, over the years, asked town meeting, asked the committee of precinct chairs, certainly sent out notices asking for volunteers. And I would tell you that although we've been able to attract high-quality people to serve, people with good attendance, people who treat other members and the public with dignity, and people with varied backgrounds that are helpful to provide some expertise, that nevertheless, we don't have routinely an extremely large group from which to choose. And there are other factors such as the geographic distribution, where we can't have too many from one precinct. So I would just say that I think it's been helpful to be able to respond quickly. And I think that there are plenty of ways in which people, both town meeting members, the committee of precinct chairs, and the public can have their contributions. And I get calls and emails from people from time to time recommending people to serve. But I think, you know, just like with town meeting members, we often are surprised when we don't have contested races in precincts. We sometimes do not have a full slate of candidates for the 3 spots. There's a lot of responsibility for the Advisory and Finance Committee. It takes a lot of time. And so the people need to be highly motivated, to be dedicated to the process.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Betsy Ho? Betsy?
Thank you, Steve. This has been great, all of your comments. I'd like to bring up 4 different things. One, I reviewed the town of Dartmouth, and they have an interesting ruling, part of their charter. It says, rulings made by the town moderator may be appealed to the representative town meeting by a motion to do so, which shall be put to the meeting by the moderator in the forum. Shall the ruling of the moderator be reversed? A majority vote shall be required to reverse the ruling of the moderator. Have you heard of that in any other town, or are you familiar with that? This allows the town meeting, if you say, well, it's 3 minutes, they can reverse it to more, or let's say you have to wear, I can't think of an example right off, but there are some times when there's controversy about some of the rulings by the moderator, and this allows for town meeting to vote to reverse that ruling. Do you have any familiarity with that? Are you familiar with it?
Betsy, thank you.
This is the town of Dartmouth, by the way.
Yes, yes, I heard that. I have not heard to any great extent at the Mass Mars Association or with town council about towns being able to put in a mechanism by which the moderator's ruling is appealed. And I would say, thinking, Betsy, about your background in education in the school, I've often thought about that and how we aren't always happy with maybe what the teacher in the classroom says, but somebody needs to maintain order and decorum, so too the principal in the school or superintendent. At some point, the buck has to stop in terms of making some decisions. And I think that certainly town meeting has a lot of control over the decision-making. I mean, as moderator, unlike some moderators, I've been very careful not to engage in the substantive debate, which I think is the role of town meeting members, to debate the substance and then to go ahead and deliberate and vote. But you need someone to be able to be a parliamentarian, to be schooled and expert in policy and procedure, and town meeting members may not always be, but there are so many powers that are still reserved for town meeting. You decide when to end the debate. We saw most recently with the remote participation, you vote on whether or not to have remote participation. So I think that there's plenty of opportunity for town meeting members to voice their view on things. And like you said, I'm trying to think of a good example where you might want that, because something like, the 3-minute rule is not such a major issue, and is something which certainly could be modified if there were a large groundswell of support for it. But I know for myself, as moderator, I listen to town meeting members who don't necessarily speak, and I also listen to the public that watches and observes a town meeting in order to then come up with a sense as to what is a fair and reasonable way in which to conduct town meeting, also being guided by past precedent and by our parliamentary handbook, town meeting time. And I think that you all benefit from having someone with authority standing up there, maintaining a level of order. And I can only refer you to some towns where that is not the case. And moderators sometimes at our meetings explain the challenges they face when they're either new or inexperienced and are unable to really manage a large group of representative town meeting members.
I just want to comment for a minute on this particular point. Steve, there's already, as you know, a provision that was put in our charter most recently in 2018, 2-6-4, which allows a town meeting member to appeal your ruling on a point of order, which is then decided by a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So that, in effect, I think, is the provision that Betsy's referring to in the Dartmouth Charter. And as you know, Steve, because we've been in this debate back and forth, this was actually done on the town of Plymouth, on the town meeting floor on a Saturday morning with respect to, I think, a resolution. And you ruled it out of order because it was not a warrant article. And I actually appealed it. But we had no mechanism in the charter to allow that appeal to go forward. So we already have a provision, much like Betsy's referring to.
And I think she said hers was a majority vote.
Bill, also, it doesn't refer to point of order, it just says any ruling.
Pardon me?
It doesn't say point of order rulings, it just says any ruling in Dartmouth. I'm just
Well,
referring,
most of these issues come up on a point of order.
right, but it just says ruling, so I just thought I'd let you know that. My second thing that I found in charters, Steve, is that both Dartmouth and Winchester fill vacancies in their precincts by a vote of the number of people who are in that precinct at a time. So if a precinct had 7 members, those 7 members would fill any vacancies. Both Dartmouth and Winchester have that provision, and it says, may be filled until the next annual election by the remaining town meeting members of the precinct from among registered voters thereof. So it says the mechanism is that the town clerk lets the precinct know that there are vacancies, and a meeting is called, and then they count the ballots and choose new town meeting members. I wondered what your opinion would be on that procedure for filling vacancies for town meeting members.
First, I would say, I think it's important to fill the vacancies. So regardless of how it's done, whether it's the next highest vote getter in the previous election, or whether or not it's through members of the precinct through a caucus, I think that you want to fully constitute every precinct for town meeting. You want to do it as soon and as quickly as possible. So, for example, one of the things that we've been talking about in our planning and preparation for the October town meeting is a deadline date for training, or for training town meeting members, or for doing some videos. And so when we met and we asked the town clerk at our last meeting when she thought we could fill all the vacancies, we set a goal of 30 days, which would bring us into this month, because we knew that we needed to do that in order to then go to the next step of scheduling training for new town meeting members. And so while I like the idea of, vote getters, I understand that there may not be someone, there may not have been enough candidates. So I think if you have still a further backup plan, I don't see any problem with that. I think my first choice would just be that the voters have voted for who they would want, but in the absence of that, I would still want at least the precinct caucus town meeting members to come up with someone if there were no other vote getter, because I just think it's important to have every precinct fully represented.
Thank you. Dartmouth has 34,000 people in 2010. I grew up in the town of Dartmouth, so that's why I picked it. And they have 390 town meeting members. My mother was a town meeting member in Dartmouth, and I don't remember anyone complaining that it wasn't working well. I have family living in Dartmouth now, and I don't hear anyone complaining that town meeting isn't working well. Are you hearing any of that kind of a complaint about large town meetings, that they're not working properly?
Well, the feedback I get primarily would be from moderators, and
I
that's
see.
why I encouraged you to consider inviting Mark Sylvia, because Fairhaven has a large number of town meeting members, and he's familiar with Plymouth. I just think that he would be a very good person to invite to get his feedback.
I just didn't know if you had heard anything from town meeting members. So I was also looking at Arlington, which Mr. Abbott reviewed for us, and I looked at their spring town meeting 2021, and they have I believe it was 254 town meeting members, and they had 91 articles for the spring town meeting of 2021. So I think that they had quite a number of sessions. So they seem quite, and a number of those, by the way, were zoning bylaw changes. So it appears that they take it very, very seriously, and they don't care how many sessions it takes to complete the number of articles, that whatever the town business needs to be done, that's what they do. So I think that perhaps we in Plymouth could also come to town meeting with that same belief, that it didn't matter how many articles there were or how many sessions it took, that we would stay and complete all the business of the town. And I think in the past, I remember 2 and 3 and maybe even 4 nights of town meeting. I think that we're capable of that if Arlington is capable of it. So I think that being concerned about too many articles or too much time doesn't really serve the town. Also.
Might I respond to that?
Oh, yes,
Betsy?
go ahead.
So The one thing I would say, and it kind of ties into Bill Abbott's earlier comments regarding resolutions, and that is that while I haven't been asked to set the, to give input on setting the warrant, because that's within the province of the select board, they set the warrant, they decide how many articles. I've only ruled occasionally on whether an article was something within the authority of town meeting. And I still feel strongly about resolutions, that if it's outside of our authority, then it weakens the legislative branch if you start meddling with the affairs of other branches of government or other groups outside of Plymouth. So while I fully appreciate interest in the nuclear power plant, and I think it's very important, if it's really something that is the responsibility of the select board or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, then does it really make sense for Plymouth Town Meeting to spend time? It costs money to the taxpayer to extend town meeting, which is worthwhile if it's going to benefit the town in the examples you gave, such as planning. But historically, some communities have not limited the warrant articles and have gone far above what is the responsibility of the town. Cambridge has often been noted for taking a position on the Vietnam War or other national issues in which the country has involvement. If we as a town couldn't decide, for example, whether to pull the troops out of Afghanistan or whether to mandate, vaccines or masking, then, I question whether or not we should be spending our time doing, debate, preparing and planning and having hearings and then debating something which is outside our control. If it's part of the school committee to decide whether children mask or the select board to deal with the power plant. So I just would caution the town really to get involved in issues at town meeting that are outside of our authority. I think you run the risk of weakening the effectiveness of town meeting when we know that town meeting should be focused on monetary issues, budgeting, bylaws, legislating, as we know a legislature should do.
I'd just like
Thank you,
to
I
say,
agree, Steve. Excuse me, may I?
can I respond to?
Okay.
Steve, we could have this debate, I don't want to have it again tonight, but basically, I believe town meeting has a more expansive role to represent the citizens of the town, and going back hundreds of years to the Old South Church in Boston, much of the serious social debate movement was done at the town meeting level, where the town was represented and spoken through the town meeting. I agree, national issues are not the purview of Plymouth, but certainly whether Plymouth was to be the location of a second major airport is. And I think for the town meeting to send a message to the rest of the state that we don't want a second major airport in Plymouth is perfectly appropriate. So this is a debate I'm sure we're not going to resolve tonight, but I do think town meeting should not be looked at as so restrictive that we're only going to appropriate money and rezone.
Yep, Bill, as a chair, if I might just comment on that, since I've used that example many times when asked why I ran for moderator, that was one of the reasons, because at a town meeting in which I was a town meeting member, you got up, I believe, and made that resolution, and my predecessor accepted it. It was a resolution made on town meeting floor. It had a great, would have a great impact on the town, depending on what was decided. And we had not had hearings. We had not gotten any feedback. It was kind of spur of the moment. And I personally thought that where we have a warrant, which is a warning to the town, that we had no warning. And so I objected to that process. And that's a little different from probably putting a resolution on the warrant. But I would just say that in the example you gave, I think that the town was not well served by springing on them an issue at a town meeting where there had been no planning. There was no information provided to town meeting members in order for them to give an informed and reasoned decision following debate.
Heather?
I had one more thing on another note, and that is the Committee of Precinct Chairs, which I served on, I think, for 5 or 6 years, and this is my first year not serving on it. And I just wanted to agree with you that the CLPC does a wonderful job and has traditionally done a wonderful job in helping representative town meeting to become more efficient, to make it easier for people to learn how to be a town member and so forth. But I think that it's very important that the CLPC, that we remember that no member of the CLPC has been elected to that position by the town. They've been elected to that position by 8 other people. Only 8 people elect a committee of a precinct. And so that's not very many people to represent a whole town, to vote to represent a whole town. So I think that, and in my own case, I remember several years saying, doesn't anybody else want to be chairman this year? No, you do it. And me saying, yeah, I'm glad to do it. And people who know me know that whatever I do to the very best of my ability, and I think I was a good chairman. But I think that there are times when maybe the chairman sort of is by default. I don't think that group, the Committee of Precinct Chairs, should have a high amount of authority or should wander into the executive branch authority. So I just wanted to say I agree with you about that. I think that having the Committee of Precinct Chairs represent town meeting and helping town meeting be better, is a wonderful thing. But so thank you.
Thank you. Steve, can I ask you 3 specific short questions based on other charters and what your take is on the same provision? One charter has the assistant moderator being chosen by the town meeting rather than the moderator. I'll just give you maybe 2 or 3 of these questions in a row and you can answer them. The second one has the finance committee in that particular town doing finance articles only. And if we were to apply that to Plymouth, the planning board would do zoning articles, the finance committee would do finance articles, and perhaps the COPC could do the more general welfare type articles. So that's the second point. And the last one is how reconsideration is handled. One of the town charters I reviewed, the reconsideration between meeting nights has to be announced the first night that they're going to make the motion the next session. It can't be sprung upon the town meeting at the next session. So those are just 3 specific points I wonder if you could comment on.
Well, so I'll go in the order in which you referenced them. The first being that of the assistant moderator. As you know, we didn't have that position. It was something I had requested, which was put in there. And I think it has worked out well, and town meeting still has the opportunity to say no. So if there were an assistant moderator who was not welcomed by majority town meeting members, they could vote against that. I would say that, in my opinion, you want to have someone working closely with the moderator and does planning and preparation prior to town meeting. And when I think to the people I have appointed over the years, I've tried to select people who have some experience in either chairing a board or committee or having served in a townwide office or both, in order to be sure that they would be competent to be able to step in as moderator. And as moderator, I understand certainly much of what goes on behind the scenes that needs to be done if someone were to step in. And it's not all that you see standing up there at town meeting. So I think it's been working out well. I haven't heard a lot of complaints about that. And some of these things, query whether you fix them if they're not broken, which is my next response to the Advisory and Finance Committee. And that is that it seems as though that's worked out fairly well. They work very hard, 15 members. Often we have people with financial background. We also have people with planning background. And I think that they've done a good job in that role. It doesn't preclude the planning board from weighing in and giving a recommendation on zoning articles, or school committee weighing in on school-related So I'm not sure that the Advisory and Finance Committee needs to be changed to a Finance Committee, though, I wouldn't object as moderator as long as you built in a structure in which we made sure that we got some good feedback following hearings by a board or committee, and query whether or not on a zoning article, do you want to just have the planning board give recommendations to town meeting rather than what you have now, which is planning board recommends to advisory finance, and then advisory finance and to select board for that matter, and then both the advisory finance committee and the select board make their recommendations. In terms of motions to reconsider, I mean, what we've done in Plymouth is we've said that anyone who has voted in favor of on a motion may move to reconsider. And I don't know that you necessarily want to wait until another night. We don't always have another night or another session. But more importantly, as a moderator, I felt that the process, if you will, should be given the highest priority. And that's why if I have a number of speakers, but I have somebody who wants to move to close the question or a point of order or a roll, whatever it might be, I want to give them speaking priority because I think that in the end, town meeting should be the ones deciding, not me. As the moderator, I really facilitate. And so, if we're going through the warrant and we're down at 10 or 11 and all of a sudden, before I get to 11, someone wants to go back and reconsider 7, I'm going to do that because I think that the 135 town meeting members should decide, yes, we want to reconsider, and no, we don't at that time. It doesn't preclude notice someone could certainly announce at the end of a session, if we're going to go to the next night, they could say, and Mr. Moderator, I intend to move to reconsider tomorrow night. And that way you're giving notice to people. You can certainly do that. The process now doesn't prevent that. But to put that in, to layer our parliamentary procedure with a requirement that you wait until another session, I don't think that's a good idea. And
I think the point was not to wait, but if you're going to bring it up at a subsequent session, you must so state at the prior session, so that it would not be a surprise the next night when perhaps the proponents on either side would not even be present, and all of a sudden somebody gets up and moves to reconsider something from the previous night.
So, all right, so I think the concern I would have is, what if people, which often happens, they leave town meeting and let's say they start getting feedback from their constituents and talk to fellow town meeting members, and they were confused with their vote. They didn't understand that on which they're voting. They want to change, they want to reconsider. To then say, well, sorry, too late, you didn't clear up your confused mind prior to the time we adjourned, and therefore you're barred from bringing it up. I don't think that's a good idea. I think that people ought to be able to, at any time, bring up a motion to reconsider.
Okay, I think Frank Mann, did you comment, question?
Oh, me? Yes, I'm here. Thanks. Hi, Mr. Trifletti, how are you?
Hi, Frank.
I think I've forgotten my 11 questions over the last 45 minutes, but that's all right. First of all, I wanted to make a comment on an issue that was brought up and you commented on, and that is about the agility of our town meeting form of government. There is, as we all know, a lot of criticism that it's not responsive enough and all. But, I was a reporter in town for a long time, and I saw some extreme cases of responsiveness. As you mentioned, in COVID, there was a great deal of responsiveness to the issues that were changing on a daily basis. But one that I specifically remember is when we had the sewer debacle, when the sewer started breaking up all around town. And within a day and a half, or maybe even a day of the first break, an emergency session of the select board met and passed an emergency bond of $1 million. And then in short span, they brought in an army of workers. So I haven't seen though, maybe there have been business situations where businesses wanted to move fast and we weren't able to do that. That might not be a bad thing in my opinion, but I have seen some great agility on the part of this town government and its staff in responding to, and the executive board, that was the select board, into emergencies. I just wanted to make that point. Now I'm going to go back to the very early part of the meeting when you talked about protecting the legislature, which I think is important, to protecting the separation essentially of the different branches. We have essentially that type of government with an executive, a legislative. You could say the ZBA is judicial, I suppose. But one of the things I'm concerned with, now that I'm on the inside a bit as a member of the planning board, I see very well-intentioned, competent professional staff doing too much of the work. I see people like myself that are elected to what is an executive board, the planning board, and decisions are being made, conversations are being had, and I'm only tuning in, and I think the rest of the board is at the last moment, a few days before the meeting. So I'd like to find a way within the charter, not necessarily regulatory, to make sure that people elected that have an earnest interest in affecting changes or keeping things in place that the town wants, that's what I feel I was elected to do, and have that opportunity. So I wonder if you have any comment about that. The staff competent, yes. Separation, yes. But are our elected officials truly either seizing the authority or being given the authority, or is it somehow being taken out of their hands by well-meaning and professional staff?
All right, that's an interesting topic for discussion. I would limit my comments really to town meeting and the legislature and say that certainly many items that come before us go through staff and go through a process. And I think for the most part, it's been successful. And in those cases where maybe the staff has been overzealous, town meeting has risen to the occasion and questioned and at times not supported. They don't, not always in lockstep with staff or with the Advisory and Finance Committee or the Select Board or Planning Board or School Committee. So I don't know. I think it may be different with planning, and I don't have experience in that. But I think as it relates to town meeting, I think for the most part, the process has been successful.
All right, thank you.
I have one more question. I forgot this question, but one thing that I voted for, and I supported in a past town meeting, was to have a finance committee, not an advisory and finance committee, and have the finance committee focus only on finance articles and not every single article. So I was wondering if you would speak to that, the process of streamlining what the Advisory and Finance Committee does. And I'm asking you because you spoke to, the difficulty of always getting enough and how arduous a position that is. So thank you.
So I think that's very similar, if not the same question that was asked by your chair, Bill Abbott. And to reiterate what I said before, I think that what we have now is working fine overall. And to change it, there should be a good reason for doing that. And while I wouldn't be opposed to a finance committee that only does finance, I would then want to make sure that you have the ability to have all other articles carefully reviewed by a group other than the town meeting and to make recommendations. Now, not all the other articles are going to be planning related for the planning board or school committee related. It may be a petitioned article. It may be about dogs or kennels or animals or circus or, any number of issues that don't lend themselves well to being put into the planning board or the school board. And so, but we want someone to advise us. to have conducted hearings and reviewed materials and make recommendations, that we can at least start at that level and then go beyond that. And so if you're going to limit to finance, then you need to be thinking about how are you going to deal with all of these other articles that may come up that also need to be reviewed with some type of advisory opinion.
Thank you. I did notice that there are a number of towns who have strictly a finance committee, and so I can do more research as to how they deal with the other articles. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think that, David, one last question.
I'm not sure if this is premature, but if you were sitting in our seat, if you were part of this commission, which form of government would you lean toward? I mean, you've shared an awful lot of insights about the mechanisms and the working parts of town meeting, but given 61,000 plus people and the complexities of the town and the growing and our budget, where would, you can choose not to answer, but I'm curious what your feelings would be, Steve.
I would not lean towards the mayoral form of government. In some communities, the mayor is also in charge of the schools. I favor having a school superintendent, assistant superintendents who have educational experience. I favor having a strong town manager, an assistant town manager that have experience in that. So I don't favor the mayoral form of government. And I certainly favor the town meeting form of government over that. Beyond that, I find a legislature that has fewer members to be appealing, and whether that not that's going to be a town meeting that is a number less than 135, or whether or not it's a town council that meets more often and with fewer members. I would be more in favor of that form of government as distinguished from the mayoral, which I want to be careful, but in terms of how I say this, but we have seen in recent years at other levels of government that to have an executive in office without any experience in the areas over which the executive has responsibility can lead us to lots of problems that could be serious. And so I'm just concerned about putting that kind of power in the hands of someone who may not be qualified but electable.
Thank you very much, Steve. We appreciate your coming and sharing your thoughts and experience.
Thank you for having me.
The next part of our meeting is public comment. So anyone who wishes to comment, would you approach the podium?
We have Matt Moratori on the line. Matt Moratori is on the line?
Yeah.
Matt Moratori.
Okay. With the, actually, another one of our speakers has just checked in, so maybe we could listen to him and then we'll do public comment. So I understand Mr. Moratori is present by Zoom.
Yes, good evening, everyone.
Hello, Matt. Go ahead. You're welcome.
How are you, Mr. Chair? Well, thank you so much. I just want to take a couple of minutes, if I may. First of all, thank you for the work that you're all doing, and congratulations to being elected to the commission. I just want to make my comments based on what I've been hearing over the last decade or so as select board member and now state rep for the last 7 years. What I keep hearing from people, and I talk to people that are outside of what I call the inner circle of government. And as you can imagine, that we speak to a lot of people in town. And I don't think whatever decisions that you make will be the decisions you make. But what I would ask you to look at over the next several months that you're doing this is see if there's a way to come up with a couple of scenarios. And I'm not saying that one scenario has to be a big mere form of government, or whatever. I'm not leaning it one way or another, but I think what I keep hearing, and I think we need to, somehow get this debate of what should we look like as a community of 63,000 to the voters, and allow the voters to have some sort of a choice between an A and a B, let's say, whatever that is. Mr. Trifoletti, the town moderator, is very articulate with some of the things that were said, some of the ideas you have to improve the current form of town meeting, some great ideas. And maybe that could be one scenario that the voters could take a look at. And then maybe there's another scenario you can come up with as well. But I just wanted to bring that forward only because I keep hearing more and more about this over the last decade or 12 years or so. And more so, obviously, because of the commission being formed, that I just keep hearing a lot of this. And it's keeping the same form of government or doing other type of government. So that's all I wanted to say tonight. And of course, my office is always available for any questions or any research you need done on other informations confirmed with regard to the charter. So.
Thank you very much, Matt. Does anybody have a question or comment to Mr. Bortori? Wrestling.
Yeah, hey, Matt, thanks for coming.
Hey, Russell.
Like you said, you talk to a lot of people, and mostly Plymouth residents. What are you hearing out there about what they feel about where we are and where we should be going? And especially with the form of government, it's what do they want? We hear, that they want more transparency and they want, but in your humble opinion, from what you've been hearing from people, what are they looking for? What do they want us to come up with?
That's a hard question to answer because, again, we do talk to a lot of people outside the circle. And a lot of people don't know how it actually operates now, to be honest with you. They don't know how government works here in Plymouth. And sometimes even on the state level, they don't know how it works. But I do keep hearing, wrestling, is that people keep saying, we're 63,000 people. We are the second largest town in the Commonwealth next to Brookline. And that in order to maybe engage people, maybe there needs to be something different. What that difference is, I don't really hear people articulating what that is. But it is clear that people are looking for something different, and they equate it to the size of the community. Now, I heard, I think Betsy Hall was talking about, some communities being looked at with 30,000 people or so. I think if it was 30,000 people, I don't think you'd really be hearing too much of, people looking for something different. But when you hear that, you're over 63,000 people and you're the second largest town in the Commonwealth, that gets people thinking, maybe we should be something different. But what that is, nobody really, I think, really understands it enough to articulate that.
No, perfect. That's exactly
you.
what I was looking for. Thank you, Matt.
Any other questions or comments?
Well,
Thank you very
I
much.
if I could
Matt.
just say, I think we are the largest. According to the 21 census, we are larger than Brookline. So we are the largest in the state of Massachusetts.
Thank you for that correction.
Thank
I
you
didn't
very
realize.
much, Mr. Bortori. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have a good night, folks.
Thank you.
Keep up the good.
Now from the audience, I think Mr. Caprone, you were approaching the mic. Okay, anybody want to speak for public comment? Yes.
The president can remove his mask, so can I. I did want to mention a couple of things that were just current right there. I should have said it to the town moderator because he is worried about, he can't picture anybody, and probably none of us can, but the question is asked, who would be experienced and he'd feel confident in running the town? What's wrong with the charter for a city council type government, opening up the election to someone that, heaven forbid, isn't in Plymouth right now but must move here within a year? This is what Braintree was actually elected a state rep who had covered part of Braintree, at that time, so we had nice name recognition. But basically, what you might find is a 40-year-old assistant mayor of a town of 50,000 that's stuck behind an old line guy that's going to be there for 3 terms and would be interested in the job and would show great experience. Just wondered if that could be in the charter on that side of the thing. So anyways, I'm Paul Cunningham, a town meeting member, Precinct 8, and I was addressing this commission for the second time after reviewing some of your documentation in the decision-making process. I find questions that pop up in many of the research documents, such as that Collins Center Charter and related documents that was provided to you, which outlined current charter activity from towns of all sizes, and it was updated in 2021. It showed towns like Amherst and Eastern and East Long Meadow are now changing from town to city with population totals of 38,000, 25,000, and 16,000. And of the 29 towns that were listed, the others were tweaking their charters, or as most cities do, they provide a mandatory 5-year review, a standard feature of their charter. That's something that Framingham found out. They're glad they did, because they had written their charter as if the chief executive was really familiar with how government worked, and they elected a school teacher that didn't have any clue how it worked. Anyways, they did have to tweak that quickly. I then saw a document which showed the 3 selected charters to study by each of you 9 members, and after reviewing these charters and making notes, I would state that you can't get the feel that you're going to get for an in-person visit, what it would create, versus your previous study of the town on paper. Especially true of a town that I experienced like Braintree, that owns the electric service, a golf course, and a few other businesses. So I speak to you as one of the few town meeting members that visited and interviewed the first-time mayors of 3 towns, Weymouth, Braintree, Framingham. It's easy to get a 45-minute review meeting with the chief executive officer when you tell them why you're doing it. And sometimes they'll bring in key members of their staff, and it's amazing what you can learn. This visit should include the business development groups in these towns and what they do to attract and develop new business, which has to be a top priority of any Plymouth politician. We do a miserable job at identifying and preparing sites to be developed, and we have to have economic contributors, not just big houses. And he did mention that auto dealer, and you all know that was Herb Chambers with 35 dealerships headquarters, would have been paying a nice tax bill, which they're paying to Ingham. So we hear the term just rubber stampers to describe some levels of our current organization. I'm talking to a senior citizen in Plymouth who was 7 years as the head of the A&F group, and he's a senior, so it was quite a while ago. He and his group would have challenging votes of 7-4 or 8-3 instead of today's vote. By a vote of 11-0-1 or 12-1-0, this article was approved. Talk about rubber stamps. As for my fellow town meeting members, I'll repeat what I have written on a number of occasions. Namely, we don't have, unfortunately, Steve, I should have told this to him, we don't have 135 members. The last 3 meetings voting, counting the votes, it's 125 members. Last year, 7 people signed on. We never heard from them again in the next 10 minutes. That's in the last 3 elections. And in the last election, omitting the charter question, there were 38 votes taken, and the average yes vote was 121 of the 125, and the average no vote was 4. We rubber stamped the last $277.7 million budget in 6.5 hours, and by my count, less than 12 questions were asked. So should we continue with this result as the budget heads above $250 million? That's up to you. I leave you with a few questions after a board member stated we can stick with this form of government due to Plymouthian exceptionalism. Could you somehow define this for us? We would like to know what that is. Also, would you please investigate the Charter Commission results, which took place in towns of 60,000 population, or 50,000 population, or 40,000 population, and tell us in writing what they recommended? And would you especially interview a city council type of government, which changed back to the representative town form in all of the Commonwealth's history, including these small towns under 15,000 population that have that form of government? Find out why they changed back, if they did, if you can find one. So this just was a spur of the moment thing. Many people say, you know, we can't afford to pay the councilors who get a token amount normally when you ask them. These are some of the things you can do when you interview the mayors of the towns. They pay a token of $6,000 to $7,000. And, but anyways, when the town can toss a 6-digit buyout to a town manager that didn't ask for it, or spend $80,000 on a, getting a mobile communication tower, because you thought there was going to be a hurricane in 2020, which there wasn't. There's not one in 2021 either. And we're now at the 90,000 mark and renting this trailer sitting around there. Or ask the school committee that we budgeted and gave $2.5 million to for PPE equipment. The government gave them $2.6 million for PPE equipment, and the selectmen said, agreed to leave $787,000 in a payroll account. We'll call it a slush account. And that enables them to then pass that around to any account they want. So those are just a few things that would be nice to get answered as you're undertaking your task. And thank you for attention to these points.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Cunningham?
Pardon? Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
I think we're all set. Thank you very much. So we have another Zoom participant. Excuse me, Mike. I think Selectman Betty Cavaco, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can't hear you if you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little louder would be great.
Sure. Hold on.
That's about right. Good. Welcome.
Is that better?
Yes, that's great.
Okay. Well, thank you for allowing me to speak. And, you know, kind of following up on what our state rep had said about, you know, choices. I believe that as we move forward through this charter commission, I think that it would be a great disservice if you didn't give our residents choices. And the reason why I say that is because they don't necessarily have an opinion of whether it should be a mayor or whether it should be a pared down town meeting, which I don't either. It doesn't matter either way, whatever the people decide. But I think one of the most important things is to have a choice for our residents. I believe it would be a great disservice if we didn't. And I would be shocked if people would accept something less than that, or would want to accept something less than that. I wanted to make a couple comments about, I know, I don't know if it was Bill or someone else that had brought up these town meetings, and town meetings are, you jump right from one to another. And then if you were going to add additional town meetings, it would also, you'd be in a perpetual town meeting. And, you know, we have people that have jobs that we need to do. So I wouldn't support an additional town meeting myself. I'm not sure what the Board of Selectmen, or if we had any choice about that. But I know that, you know, we have a $270 million budget. That's a lot of money to only be able to meet twice a year on. So my suggestion is that just to give our residents, you know, a choice, because I think it's important that, you know, they have that choice. And if we don't have a choice, I believe the Board of Selectmen could actually add a non-binding ballot question. So I think we just need to do the service that we are required to do by our residents and give them a choice. I think you guys are doing a great job. I think that it's difficult to, you know, charter these waters, but I think if you have a choice for people, I think it will make a much more easier process for everybody.
Thank you. Any questions? Let me just respond to a couple points, Betty. This commission was elected by the voters of Plymouth who had a choice. So we've already had one election, and we view our task here very seriously. And as the state statute states, we are to draft a charter. You know, not produce a multiple choice question for the ballot. If this commission at the right time, after we've listened and deliberated, and everything right now is still on the table. But at the end of that process, if the commission wants to, they can put 2 charters on the ballot. Yes, it can be done. Not often, but it has been done. It was done in Plymouth in 1990. With that charter commission deadlocked, and they decided to put 2 charters on the ballot. Neither one passed. The whole exercise that year was totally wasted. They finally had to go to the state legislature and get the state legislature to do a special act to get a charter into Plymouth. So that's the background. That's one time I know they did put 2 charters on. But this commission will make that decision at the right time. It'd be too soon in the process now to decide whether we're going to do 2 charters or 3 charters or 1 charter. But thank you very much for your comment. Do you want to talk about any ideas for reforming the present form of government, like the Board of Selectmen?
Well, the Board of Selectmen, if we stay with Board of Selectmen, I mean, honestly, it's a full-time job. So, I do this all day, every day. I haven't had a day off or a vacation in the 4 years that I've served on the board. So it's a very labor-intensive type of position to hold. And that's if you're going to communicate with your residents and do all the things that they elected you for. So I look at some of the charter language and, when people are out campaigning and they say, oh, well, I can do this and I can change that, I think there has to be some language change of the charter committee so the actual selectmen can actually do what they claim that they can do, and that's make changes other than just policy. I think the selectmen should be involved in day-to-day operations of the town, because that's what people elect us to do, to be those people for them. So I think there should be some language changes. I'm not sure, I have a couple of ideas. I'm not sure exactly, what they would be at this point, but I do know that this is, a full-time job. You're always at it. It's 24/7. And it's important. I love what I do, and I love communicating with all our residents, good or bad. But at least they're getting communication in return. So I think people expect a lot more from the select board than we actually have the authority to do. And I think those are some of the things that need to change.
And we thank you very much for your service, Betty. Larry.
I just wanted to respond to what you said, Betty. It's possible that this commission could choose not to do anything and not present anything to the people. I doubt that that will happen. But we cannot just say vaguely, this kind of government, that kind of government. What we present to the public for their vote in May of 2023 has to be word for word what the Constitution, what the charter of the town is. So suggesting that there be a choice is not impossible, but an extremely massive undertaking.
Right, Bill, go ahead.
Betty, just to, I know it's getting kind of late now tonight, but at some point, we'd like to hear from the Board of Selectmen on that concept that you just raised tonight. I know we have on our board, on the commission, is David Malaguti, who served as a select board member for many years. But as a current board member, you touched on something that's an interest to me, and that is the frustration that you have as a select person on the board in terms of what your authority is over some of the day-to-day activities as they associate with your meetings each week. So I'd like to hear from that again in the future when you have time to think about some of that language that you talked about, or possible changes or recommendations where the Board of Selectmen and their role is defined in a manner which is more accountable and transparent.
Well, I'll tell you, Bill, I actually have something written down that I would like to see. I'm just trying to find it. I took a picture of it because I always have my phone in my hand. You know, just as simple as under the select board, general powers and duties, 3.2-6, eliminate the words through the town manager. I mean, there are a lot of times, as you well know, that people don't go through the town manager, they want to come through us. Or people are frustrated, you know, with any type of staff or anything, and they come to the selectmen, and they want us to be able to, you know, try and do things. When, in fact, although the town manager will listen to all of our concerns and everything, but it really is up to her, because she does the day-to-day business. The final outcome of anything is really up to her. Although, I mean, like I said, I send things in every day. There's something I send in every day to have somebody look into. So I think that's one of the important things that I believe the Board of Selectmen are elected to represent the people, and they should be able to represent the people in every aspect of what we do.
Just to follow up on that, it would be interesting to hear what your thoughts were on that at a later date in writing. Any direction that you can give us, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Right. Other comments, Wesley?
Yeah, I was going to bring this up under new business, but since two elected officials have brought this up, I think we have a little bit of a PR problem going on, because I heard two officials that were elected officials say what they're hearing is that the people want some options. And I continually hear that this commission is not really, it's difficult, and it would be a major undertaking. Mr. Abbott, you were the minority report in that last one, so it can be done. I just think that for us to be effective, we have to be perceived, if not actually, listening to the town of Plymouth. And I think that I hear a lot of feedback from the town of Plymouth that we're not. And I'm not trying to say that we're not, but perception is reality. And I just think we as a commission need to be opened to what the public wants us to do. You know, I keep hearing that, you know, the commission, there's a majority of the commission who's decided what they're going to do way before we even get started. And I just want us as a commission to be open-minded and to listen to the town. And I just, when elected officials come and say, hey, I'm hearing from the town, we really want some options, our reaction shouldn't be, well, that's really difficult and that's a big undertaking. Our position should be, okay, well, we'll look at that. And I just think that we need to be careful, as if we're not perceived, we should not be perceived as a commission that's already decided what they're going to do.
Thank you. Any other, Betsy?
Yes, Ms. Cavaco, I did hear, thank you for your service to the town, and I did hear you say you had something written down, and I love it when I get things in writing, because it gives me a chance, as opposed to, you know, just hearing somebody talk for a long time and then lose track of some of what they said. So if you are able to send us something in writing on your thoughts on what you spoke on, I would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
And I'll be happy to do that.
Mr. Mann, do you have a comment? Frank?
Yes, I keep hearing that we had our minds made up, that we should give people a choice. The very first meeting that we had, we were told that we would not be doing our job unless we gave the minority, the clear minority, their choice in a referendum. before we had spoken a word, we were being told that we were going to be unfair unless we did that. I don't think anyone who ran for this office was unfair. We all said what we believed in, what we supported. Some of us more specifically. I very specifically said, I believe in our form of government that we have now, because I think, though every government can be done better, but it is the one with the greatest potential for participation of the greatest number of residents. That we don't have it is another question entirely. But I was the top vote getter, and I was the most, I think, out there person saying I supported our form of government. So for me now to say, it would be dishonest for me to say, I think that I would like to give people a choice of a form of government I don't believe in, that I think would less well represent them. We can do a better job of our form of government, but I don't believe I don't believe the argument that's being made that we have to give people a choice. We gave them a choice to elect people. I was willing to hear everything, but from the day one, I've been told that I'm not willing to hear from anyone about a different point of view. So let's just say what we believe. Let's just state our case. Let's just try to convince one another civilly. But I am really getting a little perturbed at being told ahead of time that I am not going to be objective and understanding and represent the community. I was the top vote getter again for this position, and I think it was because I was so strongly in favor of our form of government.
You know, if, Mr. Abbott, if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
So
Yes, you got it.
one of the things that we realize is that when we represent people, it's really no longer what we think should happen. It's what they think should happen. And I will give you the perfect example. I was 100% against marijuana in this town. Any shops, anything, 100%. But you know what? The people of this town voted that that's what they wanted. So it is my job to champion that's what they want. People deserve to have a choice. I'm not saying that you're doing anything. All I'm saying is that these are things that we hear. We hear it all the time. I communicate with people every day, all day long, even the inner circle. I'm not much into the inner circle. I'm really outer circle. So I just think it's important that, you know, one of the things that get people so aggravated about our form of government, and I'm sure you've noticed many times, is that everything is a no, or everything is too difficult, or it's going to be really difficult to do it. It's going to be an administrative nightmare. You know what? We need to get to yes. And then no should be the utmost final thing that we could do if we really couldn't do it. I think having a choice for our residents is what they deserve. And it's a choice that they want. It doesn't matter what you want. It matters because they elected you to be that voice for them. So I understand that you have a position that you feel that we have a great form of government, and I'm not saying we don't. Can it change? Can it be better? Yes, it can. But you know what? To just say that you've already made your decision, unless I'm misunderstood, that's not a luxury that any elected official has, is making their own decision. That's as soon as you're elected, your decisions of your own are no longer yours. Your decisions are for the people that elected you.
All right. Any other comment? Thank you very much, Betty. We appreciate your zooming in.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go right to public comment. First speaker, Mr. Handlin.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Michael Hanlon, town meeting member from Precinct 15. I want to add my 2 cents to the deliberations I've said this in the past in some of my written comments and some of my oral comments, that I think there are problems with the current form of government. I didn't have the time to do it the last time. I would like to do it tonight. I want to be specific about what I think some of the problems are. Now, you've already heard some of these comments from others.
He's not
You heard
gonna
some
do
of them
that.
tonight.
He's just a jackass.
Betty, shut your mic off.
Should I start over?
Go ahead, we got it.
So let me be more specific about some of the problems that I see with town meeting form of government. And as I said, you've heard these things from others before. You heard some of them tonight from Mr. Trifletti. The whole issue of town meeting twice a year. There was a lot of discussion about that whole issue. I think that's a problem, and I'll give you a good example. An example that many of you, as town meeting members, can understand. We had a library with a roof that was leaking so badly that it destroyed the carpet in a lot of books. They came in with an article for $1 million to replace the roof, and we voted for that, and that was the right thing to do. They came back 6 or 12 months later and said, well, $1 million isn't enough. Now we need $2 million, and we voted for that. Then they came back another 6 or 12 months later and said, $2 million isn't enough, we need $3 million, and we voted for that. My point is, if you had a town council form of government, they could have dealt with that on the spot much more quickly, because, as everybody will tell you, time is money, and waiting 18 or 24 months to go through these multiple appropriations does nothing but add cost to the project. Precinct caucuses do not work well. You've talked about that a lot. I've been to many precinct caucuses. I've been a town meeting member for 6 years. I was 6 years on the finance committee before that. I've been to a lot of precinct caucuses. A lot of them don't have a quorum, and yet they conduct business anyway. We talk about how we can have active discussion and debate at these precinct caucuses, and that's good. But there are no TV cameras. There's no public. We get a lot of people at our precinct caucus, but many precinct caucuses have no one from the public present. There should be no substitute for active debate at town meeting, and precinct caucuses is not that substitute. Presentation forums. When I was on the finance committee, we came up, I guess it was the precinct chairs, came up with this presentation forum idea. It was a great idea. They had 2 or 3 presentation forums before every town meeting, and they were well attended. So it's an opportunity for people to learn, town meeting members to learn about the articles. And one of the purposes of it was so that town staff and article proponents did not have to go to 15 precinct caucuses, which is a cumbersome thing to do. Several of the caucuses meet on the same night. Mr. Cohan can attest to this. He goes to every single one, and he drives all over town, trying to attend all these caucuses. I've sponsored 3 citizens petitions. I've done the exact same thing. Drive around to go to the different precinct caucuses. So I've been there, and my point to you is, I don't think it works well. I changed my point. I'm sorry, I digressed. The whole thing with the presentation forums. The presentation forums we have 1 forum before every town meeting. And as far as I know, it's poorly attended. I was sitting there with my computer because I have poor hearing and I can hear better off my computer than I can. There was 2 people signed into this meeting, and I was one of them. So I'm not convinced that the presentation forums are an effective way to do things. The lack of town meeting or town and school budget presentations at town meeting. We get 0 presentations on the $275 million budget at town meeting. I guess we're supposed to either go to Board of Selectmen meetings or Finance Committee meetings. You know, I've said this to the precinct chairs several times. It's been suggested, Mr. Cohen, I think, has even suggested it as well, that we ought to have presentations on the budget at town meeting, but we don't get them. Insufficient candidates for town meeting members. So in the last election, which is the only election that I quantified, there were 7 precincts out of 15 did not have a full slate of candidates. 7 out of 15. There were 9 vacant seats. So somebody is, you know, people are not paying attention. If you want to make a change, one of the changes you could make is that the precinct chairs should be responsible for recruiting people to serve in town meeting. Because obviously nobody is doing it. Nobody is aware, the public is certainly not aware that there are vacancies. So what is the result? You end up with people getting elected with 1 or 2 votes. We had one in our own precinct because we had a resignation after the election. We had a town meeting member that got elected to the executive branch. They had to resign. So we had to appoint a new town meeting member with 1 vote. And I spoke to that person. They didn't vote for themselves. They're not even sure who voted for them. But to me, that's not democracy. We do not have adequate discussion and debate at town meeting. In the 12 years that I've been doing this, twice have we had a second town meeting. We have 1 town meeting on Saturday, and in almost every instance, except for those 2, all our business has been conducted in that one morning, from 8 o'clock until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So,
Mr. Hamlin, 15 seconds?
okay, the last point. Comment's been made many times. Town meeting is the purest form of government, the purest form of democracy, and any other form is corrupt. I totally disagree with that. All other forms of government are representative form of government, and they are democratic by their very definition. And for anybody to say that any other form of government but town meeting is corrupt is not accurate and not true. So thank you for listening.
Any questions or comments? Wrestling.
Yeah, Mike, I think you've made these points in numerous occasions. As a member of the Plymouth Transition Charter Committee, we went out and got 7,000 signatures. We talked to a fair amount of people. I've said it, but I'd like to hear, you were out at Stop and Shop more than I was. One, I'd like to hear, what the people have been saying, why they were signing your paper. I know there was a lot that didn't know what was going on, and I think part of what you and I and our group are doing was educating those people. Just a little bit about what you learned out there, in the streets from the people that we're supposed to be representing, and then I'd like to make a comment about those signatures afterwards.
Well, there was
Can
firstly.
I ask you, the evenings, can you speak maybe just a couple of minutes, because you already wrote about this?
Say
We
again?
have your statement, on our website, which you talked about gathering signatures and what you thought it meant. So it sounds like he wants to hear it again, so if you could limit it to 2 minutes, and then we'll ask any questions.
So a couple of takeaways from the process. In my experience in talking to a lot of people, there's a lot of angry people in Plymouth. The first question that people would ask me when I would tell them we were trying to form a charter commission to look at our form of government, and they would say, "Is this about a mayor?" And I'm like, "No, this is not about a mayor," even though there are a lot of people think that it's about a mayor, and it was always about a mayor. It was never about a mayor. But people, once they ask that question, is this about a mayor? No, it's not. Then you got to ask them a question. What do you think about a mayor? And they're evenly split. There's some people that were like the mayor's form of government, and there's other, the other 50% that were, God forbid, we don't want a mayor. And personally, I do not support a mayor form of government. I think a town council should be the next step for the town of Plymouth. But that's my personal opinion. So there's a lot of angry people out there, and people want change. That would be my takeaway.
Wesley, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I was going to make this on our new business, but since we brought it up, there's been a lot of discussion that the Plymouth Charter Transition Committee paid for signatures. And I just want this on the record that our group paid an individual to gather signatures. I just want to clear that up because it's been just a bad PR thing that we paid for signatures. We did not pay for signatures. We paid an individual. And Michael and I were both part of the group that got together with this individual, gave him the message, and got the feedback. At least daily, if not hourly, we would be talking to that person to find out what the public was saying. I just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you. Larry?
Mike, the reason I decided not to be town clerk was COVID-19. And it came to me after this charter commission was brought forth by the 7,000 signatures, that if I was going to run, I was going to have to get signatures in order to get my name on the ballot. And I didn't do it in the standard way. I normally would have gone to 100 different people and handed them the signatures, the sheets. Given the difference between the town election of last May and previous town elections, don't you think that the lack of candidates is at least in some measure based on the pandemic that's afflicting us?
I don't think it was a result of the pandemic at all. I mean, people can watch all the meetings they want on PAC TV if they want to be informed and learn about town government. The news media, we all had more time, maybe if we were at home, to listen to the news media. Now, on national and international and state issues and things like that. Part of the problem in Plymouth, I'm convinced, the reason we get 12% turnout in a good election is because there is no news media that effectively covers town government. Where is you've been having a meeting now for 2 or 3 months. Is there a single news reporter in this room or watching on television or reporting these deliberations in the OCM or on PAC TV? I mean, I've watched the shows on, the meetings on PAC TV. And it's a very convenient thing to do. But where's the news media? People, like I said, I was just on the PAC TV watching the show. There were 2 people watching. So we don't have an effective way to get information to our citizens about town government. And I don't know how to change that, but I think it's a real problem.
Betsy?
Thank you, Mike. I've been on committees with you for a long time, and I know you're very sincere and care about the town of Plymouth. Sometimes I get the feeling, and I don't know what everybody else gets the feeling, that some people think that only Plymouth has problems and that only Plymouth has low voting turnout or only Plymouth has angry people in it, and I really don't think that's true. But, and you've done a good job of saying some things that have gone wrong in Plymouth, but could you send us in writing your actual suggestions for how the present charter could be improved so that the problems you're addressing, you've said this happened, that happened, this other thing happened in the library roof and so forth. So could you actually email to us a list of suggestions that you have that are going to improve our charter? I know you've had a lot of opinions, you've sent us a lot of stuff, but I don't actually have seen suggestion number 1, suggestion number 2. If you could do that, I mean, maybe you don't want to, maybe it wouldn't work for you, but that would be helpful to me. Thank you.
I will try to do that.
All right. Any other comments? Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Other public comment? Yes.
Well, Mike, should I sign you in here? Michelle had asked me earlier if I wanted to sign in. I didn't know whether I was going to speak, so I'll sign myself in, Kevin Lynch, and I'll sign Mike Hanlon, that he also spoke, and, oh,
So Kevin, would you start, give us your comments, please?
excuse me?
Would you speak? These others
Yes,
may want to
but
speak.
pause for a second. Want to make sure I have my stopwatch so I don't go over.
Right.
So here we go. I had given you folks a diagram, exactly what Betsy was asking Mr. Hanlon about, as to what perhaps my suggestions could be to change or perhaps tweak the town government. So I want to reference that. At the same time, there's been a number of different town officials that have come up here and spoken. You've asked questions and such. And yet, what I'm wondering, does the Plymouth Charter Commission, would you support perhaps you folks commenting after you yourself read things over, read the report, and then you could have 2 different opinions or just one and just sign off on it, and why you agreed with the speaker of the night, let's say Mr. Lee Hartman, Mr. Canty, Steve Trifletti, the various people, and have kind of like a Plymouth Charter Commission thread so that people could go on and see what you're thinking. Now, tonight it was very, very interesting, whereby some thoughts and feelings came out and, got a little bit interesting, and that's good. That's good, healthy debate. And I think it would do the service, that even Mr. Hanlon was saying, how do we get that information out to people? Because we don't have the old colony really reporting. There's nothing really going on, but you folks are in a unique position now. You're on the town website, and perhaps you could go and give us your opinion, let's say a week or 2 later, so people could follow it. People could then start to have a little buzz going on in town. Does that sound like something that perhaps is, again, a little bit out of the box thinking? And I think it would be a very unique thing and a good service for the town. So, at the same time when I gave a diagram to Michelle the second week showing my thoughts, I haven't heard one comment from any of you. Gee, Kevin, that's a good thing. Nah, I don't like that. I put myself out here. I come down. Sure, I may go up the backside of some people, but that's okay. That's called life. But if you really looked at the diagram, I think there's some substance there, and am I just, just putting stuff down on paper and saying, the heck with it, I might as well throw it in the trash? Are you going to go and comment on what I presented to you, such as other town officials will be coming in here? And I thought that you folks wanted the citizens to go and contribute something. Every time you speak, we're forming opinions of what you're saying. Why can't you go and tell us your opinions of what we are saying? Very interesting. And I guess the last thing I'd like to go and ask you folks is on the Plymouth Charter Commission website. First, is the town charter on the Plymouth Charter Commission website?
Well, yes, Mr. Lynch, it is.
Okay, it's on the Plymouth Charter Commission website.
Yes.
Beautiful. I'm hunting around. I didn't actually look at it as far as that. Our past charter commissions, are there findings on the Charter Commission website? In other words, we've had past charter commissions. Are there findings on our website now? And the answer?
We're starting with the current charter and moving.
Well, I'm saying, okay, you folks are now the latest iteration of a Plymouth Charter Commission. There have been past charter commissions. There have been findings that they have arrived at. You alluded to the fact it's 1990, there was a deadlock commission.
Yes, of course, the history
Is that
shows.
on the town? Would you think that might be a good thing for people to be able to look at?
Just continue with your comment. It's going to be, you make comments to us, and then we deliberate and we move forward with our work. Everything that this commission does appears in our minutes, which are there on the website. The last minutes were, I think, 8 pages long, weren't they, Michelle, of the last meeting? So it's a very...
Are the results of the past election votes on the Plymouth Charter Commission on the Plymouth Charter website?
No, they're not.
It should be.
No, they're not on there.
It should be. Is there a chronological list of past charter review committees and past charter commissions for people to see the trail that has gone on through the past years?
No, I don't believe so.
So the work of the other charters are documented and archived in each annual report in which they presented those findings in the form of articles to town meeting. So you can find these?
Notice, Bill, I completely agree with you. I have found them.
Okay, good.
Okay? But what I am trying to go and ask you, as a commission, to serve the people, so they can go and see, oh, someone said this here, someone said that there. It doesn't mean they're going to go through every little thing and bring up every little thing that they read, but I think you're doing a tremendous disservice to go and say, all of those in the past, you go and find it, we're only dealing with this right here. I don't know, folks. That, to me, is really not helping the citizens of Plymouth, and it's really unfortunate. It is very, very unfortunate that there's such a resistance that you folks are bringing to people that want to go and do what's best for Plymouth. And every time it just becomes just an arduous task. No wonder why people are frustrated. God bless you. That's all I have to say is God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Any other public comment? Mr. Hutchinson?
I'm going to sign in just so Kevin doesn't have to sign in for me. Joe Hutchinson, Precinct 12. I wanted to make just a couple of comments about suggestions that we change the town meetings, or the town manager's job description. And the reason I'd say it is because, we hired the town manager to make the business of the town work. And if you allow selectmen one or two to meddle in the DPW's jobs, tell DPW director, fix pothole 1, and then selectman 2 comes along and says to the DPW director, fix pothole 2, and then, you've got a couple of more who have an opinion on the potholes that need priority. You start to run into problems. And the other thing that I would ask questions about, actually, is, the whole business of choice of choice of charters to pick. I mean, how many would you like to have there in front of the residents? Would you like 1, 2? Would you like 4? Would you like 5? Would you like them to use sliders? How would you like to do this? I mean, we already had an election where they got the choice to pick 0 or 1, or the candidates that they wanted to vote for. And I would appreciate it if we didn't discuss all this every time and just let you guys work. I would like to hear real debate and real addressing the problems of actually writing a charter. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving along with the agenda, just a few more comments. We're each reviewing charters. Several of us have already furnished notes, and Michelle is keeping a careful accounting in our minutes of the things that we are pointing out in these various charters. And tonight she's passed out to each one of us excerpts which have those items in those excerpts. And we're asking that each of us, in between meetings, like between now and next week, highlight with yellow highlighter those items that you think make sense, that we want to carry forward and don't want to forget. Because a lot of information, a lot of substance is being put out here. We don't want to trying to think of what it was in January or February. And she will take them, those highlighted copies, and collate them and put them in some sort of assemble them so that when the time comes for us to start working seriously on a charter, we will have been able to look back to see what the items were that this charter review has produced. So we've gone through several charters. Next week, we should really try to finish them next week. I know David and Betsy were ready to go tonight with several towns and cities, but we'll do those next Monday night on the 20th. And again, highlight the ones in between. Is there any, has everybody been able to read the minutes? Of course, the minutes are 8 pages long. I can understand if you don't want to vote them tonight. Why don't you send any, we'll approve the minutes at our next meeting.
Why don't we, I'll make a motion that we approve them and correct the one typo. Let's
Well,
get them out of the way.
Anybody ready to vote on those minutes? Okay, okay, and you were going to change council to council, right? You got that? All right, any other comment on the minutes with those couple of corrections? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes? They're approved, thank you. Any new business? Larry?
Very quickly, there will be a presentation to the Board of Selectmen
Yes.
tomorrow night with a proposed new list of precincts, and there will be 17.
Wow, good.
So if that fits into our considerations, it's up to the board to choose,
Right.
to make these decisions. I mean, in addition to that, there will be lines for where these precincts are, but the question of how many there will be.
And it's available electronically,
It will be available electronically following the meeting.
right? Excellent, thank you.
What time does it go on? For the
The
select
meeting
board?
begins at 6, and I was told that they would do licenses and that I would be next.
Right.
So-
David, did you have a new business?
Yes, I do. And that is, at least two people have approached me pointing out that the recruitment of a new town manager, which is, we know is ahead of us, may be disrupted by the fact that there's a charter commission which may change the whole form of government, which may discourage candidates saying, until the charter commission narrows things down, there's uncertain long-term job prospects. I would also point out that when Betty Cavaco said she wanted to change the existing language to allow select board to direct people, remember she had a couple word changes where they're supposed to work through the town manager, and she said select board should be able to give directions, all of which suggests to me that we should really give ourselves a timetable to narrow down our choices. And to do that, we've promised ourselves we're going to have an open mind, and to date, we've been listening to basically town people, Plymouth guests, and reading other charters. But I would like to be able to, sooner rather than later, invite guests from other towns representing a mayoral form, representing a council form, and perhaps, as Steve suggested, another representative from a town meeting form of government, so that, as you know, I'm in favor of the choice option, but I'm also not a mayoral supporter, but I want to have the whole commission have an open mind and potentially narrow it down from 3 broad options to 2, or even just come to the position on this board that we're going to focus on just one form. But, we need to do it, I think, sooner rather than later, to the extent, but with a complete open mind, because I do not want to compromise our search for a town manager.
Just a question, a town manager might exist in more than one form of government.
Yes, but
How are you gonna
it
resolve
would
that?
not in a mayoral form,
Okay,
because the mayor would be the executive.
I agree, but it could exist with a council or a town meeting.
Absolutely.
So how do you resolve that issue?
Well, that's why I'm saying we should hear from others, and my goal, it'd just be a single vote at this point, potentially rule out a mayoral form of government.
I see, okay, that makes sense.
Sooner rather than later. Now, again, I don't want to prejudge hearing things. I'd love to hear someone from Braintree or Weymouth or
No, I
something
think it
nearby.
makes sense. I'd like to start narrowing a decision. Bill, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that we do have a unique situation. The town manager is not leaving for a year, and we have a year to do our work. So it's not as if that a town manager search has begun. That won't happen for some time.
Well, I understand that, but
So I'm just, as I can finish.
I'm just
I know-
reinforcing
I'm
the
just saying that your reservation about us coming to some conclusion sooner rather than later due to this pending decision, we do have a circumstance where we have an agreement from the town manager that she will continue working for a year. So without a body forming searching, we do have a window to meet our due diligence in a thoughtful way. I do want to hear from the council, mayor, town meeting
Right.
forms of
Yeah,
government.
and I'm
I
not
think we
disagreeing.
don't want to.
I'm just pointing out that, at least
trying
two
to finish.
people have pointed out to me, a smart candidate, if we have a national search or whatever, is going to wonder about the impact of this commission on their job, or their potential job.
Betsy?
I do think that's speculation, however, and I think that we have already set up a timetable, and I think our timetable is reasonable. So I think to be hurried in any way by this speculation about people applying for town manager may or may not be true. And I looked at the Fall River form of government, and they do have a town manager. They call it the town administrator. but the council does hire someone to run the government, which I would assume if a mayor government were to come into Plymouth, the person who would be best able to apply for that job would be the present town manager. So it's possible that that's not a factor at all. It's just some people have brought up that idea. But I think we should go with the timetable that we have and not be hurried. But, so thank you.
Dave, why don't we
I'm
put
less
this-
trying to hurry than I am to point out
Yeah.
that it could affect talented candidates, applying to Plymouth. That's my main point.
Why don't we carry this over to to their next agenda next Monday, and we will take it up near the beginning of the meeting? I think we should talk about it. Is there other discussion under new business? Any old business? Scott?
And I've kind of held my tongue, just because I keep remembering the wise man has 2 ears and no mouth. But tonight I'm just kind of floored by not by a lack of civility on this side of the table, but a lack of civility on the other side of the table. And I don't know if we need to, before people speak, remind them. I'm not speaking in my mouth. Get closer. I think I get any closer. So I don't know if we need to have some type of a disclaimer before we have guests speak. But tonight I was floored twice by some of the lack of civility. And I think part of our work requires the respect of other opinions and the respect of other people. And I think Billy was watching me pull down my mask and getting ready to pressing my button, but I thought better of it and I held my tongue. But I just, like I said, I think tonight, I was literally floored twice. And, I think we do a good job respecting each other and respecting all of our guests and respecting all of our speakers. But it's starting to appear that the speakers aren't respecting us. So I don't know if there's some type of maybe before we have people come up to give them remember to be civil, remember to be respectful, remember to, some type of that. I mean, we have a very important charge here. And regardless of whether that we obviously don't all completely agree on what needs to be done here, but our charge is to work through that amongst ourselves in a civil and respectful manner. And I'm a firm believer in free speech, and people can get up here and state their opinions, and we don't have to like them, but we do have to respect them. But I really think that civility is a two-way street. And I'm not really sure what type of a disclaimer we should give to our guests or what type of a reminder we should give to our guests before they speak. But like I said, I was floored twice tonight, and I really had to hold my tongue.
I think it's a point well taken, Scott. Coincidentally, Michelle passed out tonight 3 handouts, which you can read between now and next meeting. One is a conflict of interest, and then a receipt for receiving it. But one of the 3 items was a selectman, which must have been written a few years ago, of exactly what you're talking about, how to comport oneself in meetings like this.
Be kind.
How to treat the guests and the selectmen and so forth. It's very, very pertinent, if you want to read it.
I actually did, because I was reading up on some stuff today while I was preparing for our meeting. And I think the verbiage was be kind. And like I said, I don't know how to remind everybody else to be kind. I try very hard to be respectful and appreciate everybody's opinions. And, sometimes my silence is just pensiveness. I'm thinking before I speak, which sometimes is a new thing for me. But like I said, that's just my comments for tonight.
Okay, thank you. Our next meeting is October 4th. We're meeting Monday nights because of the Finance Committee's taking the Thursdays before town meeting.
No, the next meeting is 1 week.
Pardon me?
The next meeting is in 1 week.
Yes.
You said October 4th.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, no, September 20th. The 20th and then the 4th. Right. Next 2 meetings. but the planning board is still meeting other than Mondays, so we've got Mondays without any conflicts. Any other business, then a motion in order to adjourn? Motion to adjourn. Second. We are adjourned, thank you.
Joe.
Yeah.